I used to work evenings at a small medical billing office in a low-rise professional park on the edge of town. The kind of area that's busy during business hours and completely hollow by 7 at night. Our office kept late hours 3 days a week for a billing cycle reason I won't pretend to remember clearly now. And on those nights, I was usually the last one out. The parking lot held maybe 60 cars during the day. By the time I left, usually between 8 and 8:30, there were never more than a handful. The lot was long and narrow, lit by tall sodium lights that cast everything in that particular shade of amber that makes colors hard to read and distances hard to judge. My car was always in the same spot, second row from the building, because I arrived early and that was where I always ended up. I'm a creature of routine. That mattered, as it turned out. The silver car first appeared on a Tuesday in early spring. I noticed it because it was parked directly across from mine, close enough that I glanced at it automatically as I approached, and I didn't recognize it. That sounds unremarkable, but after months of the same late evenings in the same near-empty lot, you begin to unconsciously register which vehicles belong. The silver car didn't. It was a plain, older model sedan, nothing distinctive, no visible damage or stickers, the kind of car that doesn't ask to be remembered. What I noticed, and then immediately tried not to dwell on, was that someone was sitting in it. I could see the silhouette in the driver's seat, still. Not on a phone, not moving, just sitting, facing forward in a parked car in an otherwise empty lot at 8:15 at night. I got into my car, locked the door out of reflex, and pulled out of my spot. As I drove toward the exit, I checked my mirror. The silver car hadn't moved. The figure in it hadn't turned. I drove home and told myself it was someone waiting to pick up a coworker from one of the other offices. It was completely plausible. I let it go. The silver car was there again on Thursday. Same spot, same time, same still figure behind the wheel. I slowed as I approached my car that evening, just slightly, and looked over. The windows were slightly fogged, which meant the car's interior was warmer than the outside air. Occupied for a while then. I didn't stop. I got in, locked the door, left. Over the next 3 weeks, the silver car appeared 5 more times, always on my late evenings, always in that same spot across from mine. I started varying my departure time slightly, leaving at 7:45 one night, 8:20 the next, and it didn't matter. The car was always there by the time I came out. I mentioned it to my colleague, Pamela, who occasionally worked the same late nights. She listened carefully and said she'd never noticed the silver car, but that she always parked near the building entrance, not the second row. She told me to trust what I was observing. I started documenting it, not formally, just the date, the time, a note in my phone. 6 entries over 3 weeks. On the 7th entry, something changed. I came out at 8:10 on a Wednesday and crossed the lot toward my car. The silver car was there. The figure was there. And this time, as I approached my vehicle, the silver car's engine started. Not the headlights, not the ignition clicking over to warm up. The engine running. I stopped walking. I was maybe 20 feet from my car and 30 feet from the silver sedan. I stood in the amber light and looked at it. The engine idled. The figure didn't move. I made a decision I'm glad I made. I turned around and walked back into the building. I told the one remaining coworker, a man named Greg who was finishing up at the front desk, what was happening. He walked out with me. We stood at the building's entrance and looked across the lot. The silver car was gone. Not pulling away, gone. In the time it had taken me to walk back inside, Maybe 90 seconds, it had left without either of us hearing or seeing it go. Greg looked at my documentation on my phone. He looked at the empty space across from my car. He said we should report it to the building's property management, which we did the following morning. They reviewed what camera footage they had. The lot coverage was partial, the cameras positioned mostly at the entrance and exit, and found the silver car in 3 separate recordings, always arriving before I came out, always gone within minutes of my return to the building. The property manager took it seriously enough to bring in additional lighting and submit it to the local non-emergency line as a pattern of concern. The silver car never came back after that. Whether because of the cameras, the lighting, or something else, I don't know. I changed my parking spot, started varying my schedule, and stopped being the last one out whenever I could help it. What still unsettles me isn't what might have happened if I'd reached my car that night. It's the preparation behind it, the consistency, the timing, the patience. Someone had put real effort into learning my routine down to the minute. They just hadn't expected me to notice theirs. I want to tell you about a parking structure, which is different from a lot in ways that matter. Enclosed, multi-level. The sounds travel differently. Footsteps echo in directions that don't always make sense, and the lighting, even in well-maintained structures, always has dead zones. I parked in a municipal garage near my workplace for about 8 months. 5 stories, open sides on the upper levels, enclosed concrete on the lower 2. I worked a standard day shift but stayed late often, and by 6:30 or 7 in the evening, the garage was quiet in a way that the street outside never was. I parked on level 3. It had become habit by the second week, and habit kept me there. The elevator was central. The stairwell was on the east end. My spot was near the elevator, which I appreciated during bad weather. The first uneasy thing happened on a Thursday evening in November. I stepped off the elevator onto level 3 and heard footsteps. Not close, somewhere on the far end of the level, the sound bouncing off the low concrete ceiling. They stopped when the elevator doors closed behind me. I stood still for a moment and listened. Silence. The garage's ventilation was running, a low mechanical hum. Nothing else. I walked to my car, watching the far end of the level without trying to look like I was. Nothing moved. I drove out without incident. I didn't think about it again until the following week. Same evening, similar time. I stepped off the elevator and heard footsteps again. This time, unmistakably, they were moving. Not randomly, moving in the same direction I was walking, parallel to me, somewhere in the rows of cars to my left, keeping pace. I stopped. The footsteps stopped. I started walking. They started. I turned a corner to cut between 2 rows and moved quickly to my car. By the time I reached it, the sound had stopped. I couldn't see anyone. The level appeared empty except for the dozen or so remaining vehicles. I sat in my locked car for a few minutes before driving out, just breathing, trying to be reasonable about what I'd heard. Concrete structures carry sound in unreliable ways. I know that. The footsteps might have been from level 2 or level 4, distorted by the material into something that seemed close and directional. That was possible. Entirely possible. I told myself that for the next 2 weeks. On a Tuesday in late November, I came out to level 3 later than usual, closer to 8. The level was nearly empty. 4 cars, including mine. The overhead lights on the far half of the level were down to 1 working fixture, which maintenance had apparently not yet addressed, leaving a wide shadow across the eastern third. I got to the midpoint of the level and stopped. There was a man standing at the far end of the row, in the shadow, near the east stairwell door. Not walking, not at a car, just standing, facing in my direction. At that distance, in that light, I couldn't read his expression or his posture clearly. I held my position for what was probably 5 seconds, but felt much longer. He didn't move, didn't speak, didn't turn away. I walked to my car at a pace I worked hard to keep steady. I didn't run because running commits you to a direction, and I'd rather have kept my options open. I got in, locked the doors, and started the engine. When I drove past the east stairwell on my way to the exit ramp, the space where he'd been standing was empty. I filed a report with the garage's management office the next morning. I described what I'd seen, including the timeline of the previous incidents. The manager, a tired-looking man who had clearly heard complaints about that garage before, thanked me and told me Level 3's camera coverage was being expanded as part of a city contract, which didn't fill me with confidence about the current state of it. I started using the Level 1 open section after that, despite the longer walk. A coworker who used the same garage mentioned a few weeks later that she'd heard something in Level 3, footsteps that followed her. She thought she was imagining it. I told her she probably wasn't. The garage is still there. I don't use it anymore, which in itself tells you something. You can explain away one incident. You can almost explain away two. But a pattern in an enclosed concrete box with partial camera coverage and a shadow at the east end? Some environments just accumulate things. Level 3 was one of them. This last one is the hardest to tell because the central element of it is so small. If I describe it plainly, it sounds like nothing. I need you to understand the weight of context before I get there. I was a graduate student living in a mid-sized college town. I drove an older, compact car, nothing remarkable, and I parked in an off-campus residential lot, a privately operated gravel and asphalt affair behind a row of rental houses. About 30 spaces, lit by a single overhead light at the entrance and nothing else. My landlord included one space in my lease. I'd been parking there for nearly 2 years without incident. The lot was adjacent to a narrow access lane that ran behind the properties and connected to the street on both ends. Anyone on foot could walk through it. During the day, this was unremarkable. At night, it meant the lot was accessible to anyone at any hour. I worked late at the university library most evenings. I'd get home between 10 and 11, park, and walk the half block to my building. The routine was so ingrained I stopped really seeing it. I started seeing it again in February. I'd come home on a Wednesday night and found my car slightly differently than I'd left it. Not dramatically, just the driver's side mirror adjusted, tilted down slightly. I'd noticed it when I walked past and saw my own feet reflected. I stood there for a moment, genuinely confused, then adjusted it and went inside. I don't touch my mirror. I have a particular way of setting it, and I don't change it. I know that sounds like the kind of certainty people claim after the fact, but I've parallel parked in tight spots for years, and I've always been precise about it. The mirror had been moved. I didn't tell anyone. I couldn't frame it in anything coherent. A week later, I came home to find a faint circular smudge on my driver's side window, the kind made by a face pressing close to glass to look inside. The lot was unlit enough that I only noticed it because the entrance light caught it at an angle as I approached. I stood about 10 feet from my car and looked at it. Then I looked at the lot around me. Empty. The access lane was dark on both ends. I walked to my car, got in, and drove around the block twice before parking again. I don't know exactly what I expected that to accomplish. It was just movement. It helped. I said something to my neighbor Tricia, who also parked in the lot. She was practical and thoughtful, and she took me seriously. She suggested I take photographs of my car each time I left it, just a basic visual record. I started doing that. On a Sunday night in March, I came home later than usual, close to midnight. I took my phone out to photograph my car as I'd been doing. I walked around it slowly. On the passenger side window, written in the condensation, neat, deliberate letters, was a single word: soon. I stood completely still for what felt like a very long time. The word was on the inside surface of the condensation, which meant it had been written with something pressed from the outside, a finger dragged across the glass, but the letters read correctly from where I was standing, which meant whoever wrote it had understood how the surface would work, had thought about how I would see it. I did not go inside that night. I drove to a convenience store 3 blocks away, sat in the lit parking lot, and called a friend. She came and got me, and I stayed with her for 2 days. I reported it to the local non-emergency line and to my landlord. The lot had no cameras. There was nothing to review. Without a clear suspect or a direct threat beyond the word itself, the options were limited. The responding officer was kind and practical. He walked me through precautionary steps, documented everything I observed, and noted the pattern. I broke my lease 2 months early and moved. The thing I want to explain and that I find difficult to articulate is how calculated it felt. Not frantic, not impulsive. The mirror, the smudge, the window, each one escalating but slowly. Each one saying, "I have been here. I have been watching. I know your schedule down to the hour." And then that word, written precisely so I'd be able to read it from exactly the angle I'd approach from. Soon. I've thought many times about what that word was intended to do. Was it a warning? A game? An ending that never came because I left? I don't know. And in some ways, not knowing is exactly what it wanted.